We have Larry, Steve, Scott. So, I don't have the agenda in front of me. I forgot to pull it up.
Oh, you need an agenda. Sorry, Wayne.
Oh, sorry. So,
Other side.
yep. When we get going here, if anyone has any questions from the public, feel free to raise your hand or stand up and you'll be recognized. And as same goes as the board, just raise your hand and we'll have questions. So we'll get started. New business. The first thing on new business is housing production plan presented by MVP staff Ian Burns and Tyler.
Hello.
Oh,
Is this okay for the microphone and stuff too from here?
I think so.
Yeah, you're being also
Everywhere.
everywhere.
Being listened to in all directions. Great. Good evening, folks. My name is Ian Burns with the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, joined by my colleague Tyler DeStefano. We're in the Community and Economic Development Department. It's good to be back here after being here last year with MBTA communities. So happy to be back talking housing again. I'm going to present on the housing production plan update that's been going on for about the past year and a half. And then after we go over the housing production plan stuff, Tyler's going to talk about the ADU bylaw and changes to those accessory dwelling unit regulations after me. But we'll start with the housing production plan. We have a lot of content, so I'm going to go through my PowerPoint relatively quickly because I think you all have seen a lot of the pieces of this before, maybe just not in the same flow that we have here. And so I'm going to try and get through it and leave time for questions and comments from you all so that we have time for this and the ADU presentation. So Kristen, you can pull that up and get it started.
Thank you, Ian. And technology question here is like, how do I make it be a slideshow while sharing?
If you start the slideshow, it'll share with them automatically.
Yeah,
Like as long as you're sharing right now, it should just
Yeah,
work for
it's
them.
up on the screen, so if you just do,
Yeah, but we can't make it a slideshow.
Over on the left. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Good,
Perfect.
good, thanks. Welcome.
Thank you. So we're going to go through the housing production plan, kind of the process we went through, and a summary of the plan in this PowerPoint presentation. I believe the planning board members received the document probably yesterday, so I know that you all probably not have time to look through the whole thing. And so this is kind of your first introduction to the plan. I know you all might read it more later on and have more feedback, so no need to have all of your comments in today. For members of the public, I believe, if not already, we can have the town posted on the town website to review the draft plan as well. Go to the next slide there, Kristen. So what exactly is a housing production plan and why are we doing it here today? So housing production plans are a tool introduced by the state under Chapter 40B. Many of us know 40B just because of the affordable housing regulations under 40B. However, a housing production plan is a piece of that, and it offers communities a tool to plan for their future affordable housing development. So assisting communities to plan for low and moderate income residents by providing a diverse housing supply and a couple other pieces to it. The thrust of this whole entire process is that when a community has a housing production plan adopted at a local level, if you then produce affordable housing units in correspondence with the plan, you can receive safe harbor status, as it's called, and you can prevent 40B developments from moving in if you are producing affordable units and have the housing production plan adopted. So we'll get through what that means later on in the plan, but essentially adopting the plan is the first step. You can then get the plan certified after you build affordable units, and that gives you safe harbor for 1 to 2 years, so it allows you more control over local development. However, more than that, it's a tool for you all to plan for housing needs. Next slide. So the process that we went through, you have an existing housing production plan that was approved back in 2019 and expired in this year. And so about a year and a half ago, we started this process of updating your plan. So it already exists, and we were looking at what happened in the past 5 years, what's changed, and how can we make sure that it's adapted for the next 5 years in Newbury. A lot of it is updating the data that existed in the plan, updating the goals and strategies based off what you've been working on. As a part of this planning process, we've been meeting with town staff, We've been to the planning board before and talked about this, and we've had public engagement sessions. We had a virtual and in-person session last year. So the plan itself, in the document, it works through an introduction, demographic profile, local housing conditions, talks about some of the infrastructure constraints, and then the meat of it at the end, talking about those housing production strategies and how you can provide more diverse housing types in town. I'm going to work through kind of each chapter in a couple slides. Like I said, you have the full plan and it's a lot more detail, but I don't want to read verbatim 35 pages to you all. So we're going to do kind of a summary and work our way through it. Starting with that demographic profile, I'll just highlight a few data pieces. You all have seen this, which is why I'm not going to go too in depth with it, but essentially we see a continued decline in Newbury's population. And so thinking about if those are the projections, those are projections based off of today. And so we're wondering, how can we either adjust to make sure that you don't lose that much population or accommodate for that future potential need or change in population. These projections are seeing what exists today, and that in terms of housing stock and family, in-migration, out-migration, birth, death, that sort of thing. And what we know is that in communities like Newbury, when you're smaller, you're going to want to probably be growing, at least holding steady and not declining. And so when we think about housing stock, we want to think about how we can make sure that trend does not continue in town. Next slide. Along with that, we look at the age distribution. I think you all have seen this many times before. The key takeaway, that blue line, which is at the top, is increasing from 14% to 20% in 2050. That is your 65 plus population. And so we see that age of seniors, roughly doubling in their share of the population over a 30-year period. So how do we accommodate for the needs of seniors? And also, if we see a projected decrease in under 18 or under 20 young adults or children, we also know that young adults and children in a community means it's a healthy community, and how can we maybe reverse some of those trends and bring more young families in? Next slide. Paired with that is school enrollment data. We've seen a steady decline in school enrollment. This chart, we actually have an asterisk on in the plan. You can notice on the very far left, there's two really high bars. We were talking with other communities in the Triton School District. That was due to a shift in some of the schooling and the infrastructure around those times. I don't remember the exact details, but we dug into this a little bit, where there was a change in either the middle school structure or something that caused the sudden decrease in the actual population. That is reflected throughout the Triton School District. But generally, we've seen a steady decline in school enrollment. Next slide. This slide we brought up a lot during the MBTA communities discussion, showing what we consider the mismatch between the number of people living in a house and the number of units that exist in those homes. The key takeaway here is that a lot of the homes in the community have more bedrooms than may be needed for the actual occupants in that structure. This doesn't mean that every single person wants to downsize, but when we see that mismatch, we know that a lot of the people that may want to downsize are competing for only a few small units in the community. Next slide. So after we work through all of that data and the housing conditions and what exists in the community, we take a look, in summary about what happened in town. A part of the requirements for the plan is what they call a housing needs assessment. So that's really the entire data piece of the plan. This really summarizing what we've been seeing when we see an increase in housing permits for single family and other types of structures, but also seeing those trends of population going down in the community and thinking about how we can accommodate for that. Next slide, I think I have the... So looking at some of the actual housing data specifically, that orange bar and all those lines are single family homes. So you generally see single family home production throughout town over the past 20 years. No surprise there. Next slide. Cost burden, this is an item that we talk about a lot in our communities. So cost burden is when a household is spending greater than 30% of their income on housing. So the orange and yellow bars are cost burden. The orange bars are severely cost burden, which means you spend more than 50% of your income on housing. One thing we note in the plan, you'll notice the renter column on the right, there's a large 42% that's called not computed. And so in a town like Newbury, there's a very small sample size with the American Communities Survey. And if only a few people don't answer that question, it really skews the not computed percentage of a category. So that's why that bar is so big. However, this is pretty reliable to give us general trends of what your cost burden is compared to different types of home ownership. This is a little bit on par with the region, if not less than what we see regionally in terms of cost burden, but we still see that overall in town you have, roughly 30% of your community is cost burden, and that is the people that are not spending money then locally at local shops, restaurants, etc., because all their money is going towards housing. Next slide. I won't go through the data summary just to save time because we just went through a lot of it, but you can take a look and see exactly what we're looking at and how we kind of try to accommodate for that. Really taking all that data, compiling it with public feedback is what we use to figure out what the best strategies might be for Newbury's housing needs going forward. Next slide. The next chapter of the plan talks about housing development constraints. A lot of this you all are familiar with, being on the planning board. It's not a full assessment of things like utilities and infrastructure, but mostly acknowledges what the limitations are in town for development. So talking about the lack of public utilities that may exist in most areas of town, talks about the water need and those sorts of pieces. Really just detailing what we should be aware of when we think about development, because there are limitations in a community like Newbury. You can't just be building everything everywhere. Next slide. So all of that leads up to the last chapter of the plan, which is the housing production strategies. In your last housing production plan in 2018, 2019, there was a lot of strategies listed. I think it was like 20, and it was way too much to expect any town to do, even a small town like Newbury. So what we're trying to do this time around is really condense the strategies and make them more feasible over the next 5 years, combined with public feedback in the data. And so we've summed it up in 5 strategies here. In the plan, there's a couple paragraphs dedicated to each strategy worth of bullets detailing how you can get these done. I have them summarized here, and we can look at future slides with details if you want to talk about any of these in detail. But in summary, the first one is looking at the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So as you all know, you have an existing accessory dwelling unit bylaw. Tyler's going to talk about soon the changes coming from the state requiring you to change your bylaw. And so the first strategy we want to see is how we can adjust Newbury's bylaw both to follow state law and also make sure it's appropriate and works for what is needed here in Newbury and allowing more housing options in the form of accessory dwelling units. The next piece we talked about a lot, especially during the MBTA communities conversation, is exploring the feasibility of creating an inclusionary zoning bylaw. That's a bylaw that mandates a certain percentage of new construction be designated as affordable. We have a piece of that in your MBTA communities bylaw. We're requiring 10% of all new construction be affordable. This would be looking at something town-wide and doing an assessment of if it's feasible in town to require that and seeing what the bylaw might be structured as. The town of Newbury, in partnership with us, actually applied for and was awarded a state grant at the end of this past fall. And so we have a grant now to study this issue with you all and get jump-started on this issue, as well as number 1, the ADU best practices. And so we already have funds secured to start on 1 and 2. The third one is looking at an affordable housing trust. This was a concern brought up a lot where Newbury lacks an affordable housing trust, and we have many communities in the region that have one. Affordable housing trust can be really effective for bringing forward programs to help support residents, whether it's renter assistance, down payment assistance, teen senior tax abatement, whatever that looks like. They can help be the conduit to bring programs forward in the community. As a piece of that, we talk about ways to fund an affordable housing trust, maybe through inclusionary zoning, maybe through Community Preservation Act, whatever that is. But that might be one to get started with. You don't have to have money right away, but at least setting up a board and a trust so that you can have a way to implement some new innovative policies that we see in other communities. Number 4, investigate models that address creation of starter homes that are right-sized. There are 2 kind of key things we talk about in the plan with number 4 here. And when I say right-size, I'm going back to that conversation we had earlier about making it easier to downsize, but also on the flip side of things, having starter homes or something for young adults moving into the community. 2 areas we talk about here. Number 1 is what's called a 40Y district. This is similar to 40R if folks have heard of that on the state level. 40Y is zoning that the state allows communities to adopt, and if communities adopt the zoning, they get incentive payments from the state for adopting that zoning, and then get incentive payments when they build units in that zoning district. A 40Y zoning district is what's called a starter home zoning district, and it stipulates that housing sizes and lot sizes within a district can only be a certain size, small lots, small homes, for encouraging construction of smaller sizes, as opposed to 1 or 2 acre zoning and seeing 4,000 square foot homes go in those areas, but thinking smaller house sizes. Number 5, ongoing community education. We heard this a lot during the MBTA communities process and during our public feedback for the HPP here. A lot of folks want to learn more about housing, and we also know it's essential in all of our towns at town meeting. You need an educated resident group to actually know what's happening and know how these housing changes affect the community. And so continuing community engagement with the community, not only with residents, but also with members of the planning board and select board, and keeping that knowledge base high so that we can all have the best platform going forward when we talk about these housing changes. I'm going to stop there. Like I said, I have more details on each of these strategies and other slides, but That is the bulk of it. I sped through it to allow us plenty of time, but happy to take questions on this. What I'll say beforehand is that going forward, a few things. Number one, eventually the planning board has to adopt this housing production plan, and eventually the select board has to adopt this housing production plan. So I believe the way we're going about it in Newbury right now is we're having you all review it, give your feedback, look for changes to eventually approve it, and then send it to the select board for their consideration and eventual approval. It's then sent to the state for the state to review it and approve the plan. So that's the process we've started today. You all can take as much or as little time as you want in reviewing the document itself and asking for feedback or looking at changes. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
I will, but after you guys.
Peter, Mary? No? Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Can you remind me again what the timeline is for approval? Like,
Yeah.
when do we need to get our job done to then pass on to the select board?
Yep, so there's no statutory deadline, like the state isn't requiring you have one. You do currently have an expired plan, and so it's in your best interest to get a new adopted plan as soon as possible. MVPC, we had a grant to essentially write this plan that you see here today that expires at the end of this calendar year. We still have some remaining funding to help you with it through that, but the bulk of it we're trying to get done by the end of the calendar year. And then the future approvals can certainly come in January. Happy to still be working with you, but like if you see this and you think, I want chapter 2 rewritten, it's best for me to know that before the end of the calendar year so I can utilize the funds we have right now. But little changes, it's not a huge deal if it comes after January 1st.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about inclusionary zoning on the planning board. And we could never, speaking for myself anyway, could never quite find the right fit in the absence of a housing authority or a trust. Are there any communities that have found a way around that?
As far as I know, there are communities without, I would say, active affordable housing trust, but they have trusts established, just like on the books, and the money goes to a pot, but there's no one actually doling it out. I don't know if there's any communities off the top of my head that have nothing established. Usually you would have something so that if you have what's called payments in lieu, so that if a developer doesn't want to build the units, they can make a payment to the town. That payment needs to go somewhere. And so at least you would establish a trust. I mean, later on, you could establish the rules for doling out that money, but you need some type of...
Well, that was precisely the issue we've been struggling with. Is it usual or unusual, say, for the select board to act as trustees? Affordable.
I don't know. I can look into that. I'm not sure off the top of my head if that's typical. I would say unusual. In most cases, I know it is a separate board that oversees that funding, and I don't know if that's required through statute or if it's just a choice every town has made, but we can figure that out.
And the establishment of the trust is through town meeting?
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, we, Daniel and I both attended a webinar today by Mass Housing Partnership about affordable housing trusts, and it was, the focus of a lot of the discussion was about how the Community Preservation Act, works in partnership with affordable housing trusts. So if a community has passed the Community Preservation Act, which is a portion of taxes paid on registered, on the Essex County Register of Deeds, would be a small portion of those funds would go back into communities. That's an important way that towns fund their affordable housing trust fund at the start. Like it sounded as though those often are established together, not that they have to be, as Ian's saying, but that they often are, because it's a regular source of revenue to go into the affordable housing trusts. However, there was a discussion about if a community doesn't have Community Preservation Act, what are the comment was there are other creative ways for communities to support funding. One primary is inclusionary zoning in lieu payments. So instead of the developer actually building an affordable unit, they pay funds in lieu into a fund, which can then be used by the town. But there were some really other interesting ones that I certainly thought would be fun to explore more. A number of communities put free cash at the end of the fiscal year into their affordable housing trust. That was one that came up among several communities. Some have cell tower leases. That's sort of a smallish, but it's a regular revenue annually. The other interesting one was the state allows communities to have a local tax on short-term rentals, and a number of communities use that room tax, direct it into their affordable housing trust. Some communities do private fundraising because apparently donations into the affordable housing trust are tax deductible. That question was asked, which was interesting. So you could also donate land, or, in addition to just money, you can donate land or even a building to the Affordable Housing Trust, and that's a tax deductible charitable gift. That's a whole interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, so it would be great to look into that, as you all think about an affordable housing trust and get some state partners. We listened to the plan, some resources for that to get started, dig into all of those answers. And when we look at inclusionary zoning as a part of the grant we received, we're gonna look at what's the best way to do it in Newbury, considering you maybe not have an affordable housing trust. How can we set up payments in lieu that would be effective? What's the structure for that? Every community does it a little bit differently, and so more to come as we go on those conversations. Maybe we go through the whole process and it doesn't work. Whatever that is, we wanna do our due diligence.
So this is my advance apology because my questions, I imagine you might have already asked another time. So I have a couple questions. One is with inclusionary zoning. I'm reading a bunch of articles and being kind of aware that there's a real range of effectiveness that I guess most towns' inclusionary zoning policies aren't considered to be effective because the percentages are too low, et cetera, to have an impact. And so I don't know what stage you are in proposing, but my question is this. Typically, it's the 80% AMI that's used. Is it possible in the inclusionary zoning, or I don't know, even the 4Y thing to, and has the planning board already discussed having 50% and 30% AMI? Because, I think we witnessed this at the whole MBTA thing when people start looking at what's called affordable. It's not affordable. I know our own town assistant librarian made too little to be eligible for affordable housing in Georgetown. Okay, so we all know how that goes. But has that been discussed, and is it even possible in inclusionary zoning to mandate 30, 50%, or in this 40Y thing?
Yes, it's possible to mandate lower, so that's one of the things we will certainly look at in consultation with the planning board. To your point, there's a range of policies that communities have. The thing with inclusionary zoning is trying to find the right balance of requiring enough where it makes a difference and not requiring too much to the point where development never happens, because eventually a developer can't make a profit and they won't build anything. But too low, you're not gonna get the affordable units you wanna see. And so we'll work through all of that and talk with folks and have more opportunities for public feedback on that as we work through that process, yeah.
Good,
Thank you.
Pete, yes?
Yeah, I got a quick question. Ian, so how do we gently motivate a developer to want to step into this and maybe step into it, with accessory dwelling units? How do we package that all together?
I would say if you're wanting to make sure that development still happens, number one is engaging the development community as a part of your process. And so you want affordable housing advocates at the table, you want residents affected by it, and I think you also want the development community to know where that balance is, because everyone's gonna have a stake in it and have a good thought process on it. In terms of accessory dwelling units, a lot of that remains to be seen, mostly because there isn't a huge industry around it in Massachusetts yet, because this is new for it to be legalized statewide. In California, when that was legalized a couple years ago, you now see industries wholly centered around accessory dwelling units. And so it would, I wouldn't be surprised if that popped up in the state here, and at that point, we'd be curious to see what happens. Right now, it's a lot of piecemeal when a homeowner wants to do it, and it will still be when a homeowner wants to do it, but might be easier for them to find a contractor to build it in 3 years than it is today, because they're a bit more new today.
There was a lot of, I feel weird not being able to talk to you, Pete. But there was discussion by the state HLC staff about plans and discussions to look at financing. And that point Ian just made is a great one, that other states are a little bit ahead of us. So I think there have been ways that the public entities can incentivize or encourage for smaller scale projects like ADUs. That is, being looked at, and they sort of promised that they'd have more guidance on that as well. So it'd be interesting to see.
Are the ADU questions after?
Yeah, I would encourage you to wait for the presentation to come and then ask some more
Segue, yeah.
questions about ADUs, yeah.
Right.
Does the MBTA Communities Act affect your distribution of age distribution or population distribution? You're already showing a decline. But
It won't be factored into this, no. Because this is just looking at historically, the past few years, they factor in that data for projections. It doesn't look at the zoning that exists, and so it wouldn't account for that. Yeah, good question.
But realistically, wouldn't the population projection not be as steep a decline?
Yeah, if you see construction out of that, it may not be. The projections that the Donahue Institute does, which partners with the state to do them, they see like the past 5, 10, 20 years, what has the population trend be? If that continues, it's essentially saying if your trend continues, where it will go.
Yeah, it dramatically drops,
Yeah,
and that's based on just how it's set up today.
yes, exactly, yeah.
Thanks, Ian.
All right, I'm gonna hand it off to Tyler to talk about accessory dwelling units, if that's okay for the
Yes,
next part
that's
of the
great,
agenda?
thank you, Ian.
Great, and
Welcome, Tyler.
thank you.
Oops. Guys,
Right.
okay.
So to start, the reason why we're looking at Newbury's ADU bylaw is in response to the Affordable Homes Act, which was passed in August 2024. Basically, this is authorizing accessory dwelling units to be built in single-family zoning districts by right. So there's some communities that are being proactive before the February 2nd of 2025, 180 days after the bill was signed. This act will go into effect. So I'm just looking at for the next slide. There's two sections that refer to the ADUs in the Affordable Homes Act. Section 7 is referring to the actual definition of accessory dwelling unit. So Section 7 is changing this definition. Before, it's turning into more of a self-contained unit inclusive of sleeping, so adding some extra details from Newbury's definition. And the state also goes into some further regulations, maintaining a separate entrance, looking at the gross floor area maximum, and looking at additional reasonable regulations that the municipality can impose if they choose to do so in their local bylaw. Go to the next slide, please. So in the Affordable Homes Act, Section 8, this is the part of the act that is authorizing ADUs by right to be built in those single-family zoning districts. it states that no local bylaw, including like Newbury's ADU bylaw, can unreasonably restrict the permitting of ADUs, and they can also be subject to reasonable regulations that the state defines. So on the next slide, the state defines some reasonable regulations according to the Affordable Homes Act. Those include owner occupancy, well, those would be unreasonable, but reasonable would be site plan review, still have to follow the Title V septic requirements. There's still local autonomy over like setbacks, bulk and height of structures, and that normal zoning process. And the state is allowing restrictions on short-term rentals. Some unreasonable restrictions would be requiring owner occupancy of the ADU or the principal dwelling, requiring a special permit or other sort of discretionary zoning approval for the use or the rental of that accessory dwelling unit, requiring more than one parking space for an ADU that's located outside half a mile radius, so any sort of commuter station, subway station, ferry terminal, and bus station. We're still waiting on further regulations on what they're going to define as like a bus station. Is it a bus stop, or is it a flag stop? Is it an actual I guess bus shelter? So they're still kind of looking at that and whether or not that half-mile radius will include the entire parcel, or is it just going to be, bisecting a parcel? So there's a lot more details that the state will need to come out with. And go to the slide are we on? I think it's good to the.
Oh, did I skip?
Oh, sorry. I think I moved that slide after the fact. But you can go back one actually. That's fine.
That's fine. Okay.
Yeah, this is just looking at the approval process. It's now only a simple majority vote is required to adopt or amend an ADU bylaw. I believe that was changed in 2020 because this change has to do with allowing ADUs by right. The voting process, instead of having a 2/3 supermajority, is now only requires a simple majority vote. And of course, consult with your town council for those processes. Start looking at the actual bylaw. So to comply with the state law and incorporate those local reasonable restrictions, Newbury should remove its distinction between attached and detached ADUs, removing regulations on the size of the ADU because the state already defines that gross floor area. Looking at occupancy, the Newbury cannot require owner occupancy, which it currently does. And there's some extra, I guess, discretionary design standards that the state might deem unreasonably restrictive in the current ADU bylaw. The ADU should be allowed by right without a special permit. It's currently needs a special permit process. For additional ADUs, the Newbury can require a special permit process. From what we've heard, it will be necessary to acquire a special permit if you allow additional ADUs at all, so that's an option as well. If you do acquire it, if you do, I guess, allow for additional ADUs, there should be a special permit process, but you don't have to allow for a second one. You can just opt for one ADU. And then I'm gonna dig deeper into these amendments, specifically like looking at the definition of the ADU, the gross floor area, the special permitting process, etc. So if you go to the next slide, we can look at the definition. So the left side is what the current Newbury ADU definition is in the current bylaw, and we are supplementing that with the state definition so that I guess the definitions are the same and the bylaws will be compliant with the state regulations. So just changing the actual language, including being more specific with what people are doing in this ADU, cooking, sleeping, using sanitary facilities, adding those details, and then also adding those kind of 3 criteria that the state defines in an ADU, maintaining a separate entrance, looking at the gross floor area can't be larger than half the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller, and then those additional restrictions that the state would deem as reasonable. So looking at the additional ADU authorization, currently additional ADUs, I think currently no more than 1 ADU may be created on your lot, so that's what you guys currently have. So this is an optional one. Additional ADUs need to require a permit, but you don't have to allow additional ADUs. So that's just something that we'll have to decide at a later point, how you want to go about that. But currently, I guess if we're going for maximum housing ADU production, we would allow for an additional ADU with a special permit process. The next slide. So currently there's a line in your bylaw about no borders or lodgers within either unit of a dwelling or lot with an ADU. So we kept that language with the boarding and lodging, and we used, the state defines a short-term rental as 31 days or shorter. So we included, that is something that you can restrict. You can restrict short-term rentals shorter than 31 days or I guess whatever time period you'd like, but this, we went with the state definition of 31 days at a time. So currently the bylaw in regards to utilities, it says it shall be extensions of the existing utilities of the principal dwelling. Our recommendation is that you allow either new or separate utilities, just to give residents more flexibility in how they want to do that, and that'll have to align with, you know, the building codes and Title V and things like that. But it just gives residents another option. We want to kind of maximize flexibility at this point, given that we're still waiting on some further state regulations, trying to keep it as flexible as possible. And then looking at parking minimums. So currently, a minimum of 1 parking space shall be required for an ADU. So that, I mean, that basically aligns with the state definition. I guess right now there's a parking minimum. I guess the state definition is more of a parking maximum, meaning like there can't be more than 1 parking space required for an ADU. And no parking spaces can be required if it's in that half-mile transit radius. And just looking at next steps, like I said before, February 2nd is the date that that Section 8 part of the Affordable Homes Act goes into effect. It is not a deadline, meaning it's not like a regulation similar to the MBTA communities where that is a legally binding deadline. But if a community wants to be proactive in setting up those reasonable restrictions and regulations, if they don't want to go by the state definition, well, if they don't want to go by the state criteria, they want to add supplement some additional regulations, it would be important to update their bylaws so that even for ease of developers or residents coming in and looking at your bylaw and not understanding that that bylaw is not in compliance with the state law, I think that would help expedite the process just to have that in your zoning, just to have that up to date, and also add those restrictions that supplement the state definitions. And as you're probably familiar, just looking at this next steps, reviewing the bylaw, looking at the public hearings process and approval at town meeting would be with a simple majority that would adopt and amend the new ADU bylaw.
So one of the things that we're working on, and I don't know if you sent a copy to the planning board yet, but the red line edits to Newbury's bylaw. So Tyler looked at your bylaw and went through and redlined where changes would need to be made, and I believe you all have a copy of it now to take a look at and see where we're recommending changes based off the state law. What Tyler was referencing to with that February 2nd or 3rd time period is the date that the state is going to be allowing ADUs by right across every single family zoning district. However, we know your town meeting happens after that. And so one of the things we've also been talking about with our communities is how you can account for that gap essentially between when ADUs are allowed by right everywhere and when your town meeting can adopt a local bylaw. Number one, we don't expect a crush of applications all of a sudden. I mean, certainly there may be one or two homeowners that want to do something right away, but in other communities, we haven't seen it rushed to happen when they pass bylaws. However, due to the way that your public hearing, that the public hearing process works and the town meeting process works, we've actually been advised that if you start your public hearing process before February 3rd for a new bylaw, if a homeowner builds a unit between February 3rd and town meeting, and then town meeting passes the bylaw that the public hearings had started for prior to February, the ADU that they built in that time has to adhere to the bylaw that passes town meeting. So they're essentially building at risk during that 3-month period. And if they build something that passes town meeting and is not compliant with town meeting, they would then have to change it essentially. So it's in the homeowner's best interest to not pull permits if you're working through a public hearing process, but once you advertise this bylaw in the public hearing, you're essentially protecting yourself so that if it passes town meeting, anything that happened between the public hearing and town meeting has to adhere to the bylaw that passed town meeting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's really weird and technical, but that's what we've been advised, and I would encourage you to talk with town council about that as well, but that's what we've seen other communities trying to do.
So currently our draft schedule to town meeting is February 4th for the first legal notice in the paper, but it's a little bit in flux. These dates are what we've been working towards, but that's just an interesting consideration.
Well, and the only issue would be if someone applies on February 3rd then, because it's whenever you
Right.
advertise it. So from the 4th to town meeting, you're
That's, yeah,
essentially protected, yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so that was awesome, and we also have some work that Martha's been doing to just kind of lay out specific questions as a follow-up to that, so I don't know, Woody, if you wanna take any questions now, or if we should just pass the mic to Martha.
It's entirely up to you guys. Does anyone have any pressing questions right now, or we'll move on to Martha?
Woody, I have one.
Yes, Pete?
So Tyler, thanks for that presentation. I just wanna wrap my head around the slide that had the reasonable and not reasonable. That was the beginning of the presentation. And it said that because currently we have an owner must be in the primary residence. Why is that now considered unreasonable?
The right, so you currently require owner occupancy for your principal dwelling. The state, in the Affordable Homes Act, they're not requiring, the municipality can't require owner occupancy in the ADU or the principal dwelling.
It's in state law simply, they're now saying that you can't require it.
Okay, yeah, I guess I don't understand the reasoning.
The reason why.
The reasoning, obviously we weren't part of the legislative discussions, but the legislature determined that for the best chance of production happening out of this law, they weren't going to require owner occupancy of either structure. I think it also comes down to the enforcement of that and the way that, when you put a home up for sale, if there's someone in the ADU and the homeowner is moving out, but they were renting the ADU, if that makes challenges with buying the next property, whatever that is, and that enforcement has been challenging in communities. And my best understanding too is that looking at the production of it, ensuring that a homeowner or potentially a renter that's moving in, they have the opportunity for those housing types. Defining the occupancy too, if you have someone that wants to move, if you have snowbirds that go to Florida and they want to rent it out for the winter, is that allowed? And so they just kept it as simple as possible. But that'd be a good question for your representatives and senators that passed the law.
Because actually, I thought it was solid that you had the homeowner responsible and involved in this process.
Right, right.
So now, basically, you can have a series of investors doing this.
Exactly.
Sure, yeah.
And so what good is that to a community if you don't know what the motivation is of the investment?
Yep.
Other than money
Well,
and the goals of a community, quite honestly, right?
doesn't it open up another housing opportunity for a smaller housing unit? So
Yeah,
wouldn't that
that
be
certainly
the
could.
benefit to the community, is adding housing that's not big but small?
I know in many situations, rules, laws, regulations, you can be grandfathered in, so that the state has come up with something where they're not taking into consideration that some towns already have existing rules, it's just gonna overlay them.
Yeah, essentially every community has to make change. There are very few communities that their current ADU, outside of the owner occupancy, I mean, it's also detached versus attached. And right now, you require, I think, a special permit for detached ADUs. And so that has to change. And so the owner occupancy is one of the many pieces that need to change, yeah.
Well, Ian,
Thanks.
did I
just didn't understand the
misunderstand?
thought process, but thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I would certainly, I would encourage you to check too with the legislative folks that pass the law too, to understand their reasoning behind it.
Perhaps I misunderstood you earlier. I thought I heard you say that the new statute does not require owner occupancy, but it can be required at the local level, the municipal level?
No, it cannot be required on the local level, right?
This is a funky question. I'm just thinking of how so many people here will have septic systems, and that'll be kind of the real limitation. I don't even know what's possible, but can somebody do something like an ADU with a composting toilet and, somehow, if they're creative, really even bypass the whole, or is that even a thing? I mean, I know they're composting toilets, but are they functional for real apartment units, and is that an option in building in some areas and things like that?
That would come down to your local building and health code, and whatever, and Title V is mostly about septic, but if it adheres to building and health code requirements, then it would be allowed. And so certainly, there's gonna be restrictions if homeowners are adding bedrooms in the form of ADUs to their property, they might have to expand their septic. And so if that's a way around it, maybe it's possible, I don't know, but yeah, that'd be a building and health code issue.
Is that a thing, like where there are places where building codes allow those as part of regular?
I don't know. I know places have them. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I think Massachusetts is still on like the policy. The policy is supposed to be unlocking production, but the market-driven side of ADU production isn't matured yet in the state. There are a few companies that are trying to capitalize on the law, like attending the state webinars and plugging their fact sheets and things like that. But I think it's still a untapped market currently. And then changing the zoning is just the next step in kind of spurring that private sector production.
Yes, go right ahead.
So Eric Spahn, 14 Old Farm Way, Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. We've seen and dealt with a number of these. So I have lots of questions. And I think the intent of the ADU was to set up some control and regulations so that the residents of Newbury didn't get too creative unto themselves and create something that would then become a problem later. So the short term, and we've seen them, some people have been very straightforward and typically what we do when we receive an application is we just print our section and we read and check off every single line of our bylaw. And we've also seen where people have submitted this is gonna be for my mother-in-law, it's also adjacent to the pool, it's within the pool perimeter, you know, we've seen all types of things, and so the intent is like, is this going to be a successful ADU? Or is it gonna turn into something else? And the intent of having the homeowner present on the property is there is somebody in control and there is somebody looking out for it. And the intent of having the utilities run through the primary to the secondary, again, is a control that is a betterment for everybody in town and especially the neighbors. And we've had some, and most of them have been very connective where the secondary ADU has a relation that is secondary to the primary. And recently we had one where it was off in the corner of the property and there was no relationship either by driveway. And so is that a good thing? You know, what happens if the ADU becomes defunct? I can see the answer to your question might be is that developers who have a piece of property and they're renting it might be more likely to build an ADU to get more income than somebody that actually owns it and then wants to have the opportunity to get income but also wants to maintain it. Who is responsible for maintaining the property if there's no homeowner on site? Who's gonna put in a secondary small septic system for a smaller unit? And if they join the two, are we causing trouble by where you put them on site so that, you know, most properties are an acre, it's not, but you guys deal with the property and you see where there's separation between wells and septic systems, and if now all of a sudden you're putting another unit in that has a separate system, I don't know, is an acre enough in order to satisfy that, where we're not taking away the rights of somebody else for somebody else that just happened to jump into this first? So I'm not opposed to it. I think it's a great idea, and I think our premises for why we would allow ADUs in the first place, which is the first part of the section, is very clear and understanding of why we would allow it in town. But we're also all here to make sure there's some checks and balances so that we don't end up with I don't know, a Plum Island redo where there was a great idea a long time ago and now we've outgrown that and we've got some issues that came about something that was unchecked. So obviously I have a lot of interest because we're dealing with it. If we're no longer dealing with it, I still have interest because the general premise of being on the ZBA is just protecting everybody's rights in Newbury for the benefit of everybody and giving as much to the homeowner or the property owner that wants to do something as much as the neighbors equally. So it sounds like a great idea, but it sounds like there's still a few things that don't quite make sense. And what about the PIOD and what was set up there in that agreement?
Plum Island Overlay District?
Yep, for the number of units and one additional bedroom, and now all of a sudden you've got another unit and.
So if there are certain, you know, either building codes or dimensional standards or something that exists that would prevent the ADU from going in, they can't just build, like let's say they have a tiny lot and you require a setback that would not make it feasible to put in an ADU, they can't just put one there if the setback would prevent it, for example. And if there's certain septic restrictions or other building code issues, they can't just throw it in there anyway. So one of the things I've been trying to think about when I've been visualizing this is thinking about, and especially the renter versus owner question, is like, if there was just a blank lot, if there was just an open lot and it was 1 acre and someone bought it today to build a single family home by right, if they were gonna eventually rent out that single family home, they're gonna follow the same process that they would now with the ADU if they're gonna build the ADU and rent it out, where they have to go to the building commissioner, check off that they're following on the building code, put in the appropriate utilities. It's the same thing with an accessory unit now, essentially. And not to say that that's every resident's gonna believe that's good or bad, but it's the same process and they can't just throw something up there. But if someone wanted to rent out a single family home, they could do that today too. So that's kind of how I've been visualizing it. I don't know if that helps anybody else, but that's how I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, it's, I mean, to that point, it's like a duplex. Like, if a property can have the duplex on it now, there's no requirement regarding whether those are rented or owned. Similarly with the single family and the accessory dwelling unit, it's two dwelling units that have to meet all of the same parameters that we have for everything we've been talking about, septic, utilities, setbacks, bedrooms, all of it still has to apply. It's, I mean, it would be a GIS exercise, but like how many, if everyone who could do one did one, how many would it be in a town like Newbury? That's kind of an interesting thought exercise. But anyway, it's, there's some different ways of thinking about it than how Newbury has had it operating for a while, so.
And as Eric said, Plum Island's gonna be a challenge.
Yeah, and we've seen people propose ADUs that look like they're more of just an extension, or they're a guest house more than any intent to have really an ADU the way they were set up.
And so I encourage you all to think about too how you want to incorporate short-term rentals with this. As Tyler mentioned, it's an option to regulate those further if you want to. So you can prohibit the ADUs to be allowed for short-term rentals. You can put, like Kristen was mentioning earlier, some communities have local taxes on those depending on what you want to do. So thinking about that as well. Obviously, at the end of the day, who's going to enforce that? That's a challenge in a community with less municipal staff than other communities. But you can certainly put restrictions on that. So I would encourage you all to start thinking about how you want to handle that when it comes to ADUs and short-term rentals.
Eric, is the PIOD the only overlay district in Newbury?
Well, there's others for industrial, but it's the one that, it's the only one that really comes up in zoning for somebody that wants to do something. Plumbush Downs is very unique in terms of its essence and what it is. It's one large condominium property with a tremendous amount of land. So the checks and balances don't quite apply when somebody wants to do that, even though we try to apply reason to that property. And then, Plum Island just has issues, and the leeway for the zoning has always been slaughters that, are you not exacerbating, are you improving, and are you in keeping with the neighborhood? And any time there's been some great confusion and we've asked town council for some guidance, the neighborhood gives us great leeway to make an interpretation and understanding. And that neighborhood could be a street, or it could be half of Plum Island, depending on how we see it and how that property is situated. And town council has said that repeatedly, that it's very wide for us to do that.
Yet, we've got a PIOD, which is meant to be part of the price of bringing water and sewer down there on an area of critical environmental concern, a barrier island, whatever. And it seems like, if I'm understanding what the state may be charging us to do, it's going against their previous stand on trying to limit the growth on Plum Island.
So you don't overtax the sewer system that you just put in, and you can keep control of it, and everybody's got equal share of that system. But what's the difference between a 1 and 2 family and a AUD on a piece of property if they're attached now?
Square footage would be the only difference. Yep.
Thanks for hearing me out.
Do you wanna go through some of your points? Do you think
Yeah, and some of
there's
this is
some-
repetitive to what Tyler had done, but it's complicated, so it might not be, might not be a bad thing to do.
Okay.
So as Ian mentioned, Ian and Tyler went through our existing ADU, marked it up, made red lines. Town council also, well, I went through it and town council also went through it. So I know Kristen sent out to you basically what's a composite of all of those red lines, done in a format that if we were to do it this way for town meeting, it would be, showing the additions in bold, underline, and the deletions in strikeout. It gets to be pretty messy, so that may be one thing that we want to talk about, whether, whether we just say it's going to be deleted in its entirety and replaced with a new one. But, this is, Kristen's pulled it up on the screen, and what I also did was kind of put together a matrix that summarizes our existing bylaw, and what's now allowed by the state. And I think one thing to keep in mind is that, we already allow ADUs, a lot of communities don't, we already do allow them. We had parameters around them, and now the state is asking us to kind of look at these parameters differently, so.
I'm going through this really fast, but I think that, just to repeat what Martha said, was when you bring something to town meeting, you have to either say, like, we're replacing all of this with something else, or you have to do what this looks like here, which is like strikeouts in bold and italics of like, this is what's being modified to our current bylaw. So again, just to repeat, it's sort of an open question whether this is too confusing to have all of these edits, at town meeting and have someone trying to understand, like, what's the new thing now? Like, what are we actually talking about going towards? That would argue for like replacing the edited version with the new, so anyway.
So you're either at town meeting amending individual sections or striking the entire ADU section and submitting an entire new one.
Thank you.
Replacing it in its entirety, yes.
Correct. So that's just what we wanted to kind of demonstrate as one of the open questions at the moment. It's gets pretty complicated, so I think that among those of us who've started talking about it, I would say we're leaning towards replacing the entire thing with the new thing.
For the general public, it might be
Easier to
easier to understand it all when it's all,
Right. So I think if we can describe at town meeting what the differences are, and there will be the public hearing process and other public engagement, so hopefully it will become clear. But I think one of the things about this document, there are a lot of notes in the right-hand margin, comments from me, comments from town council in terms of things that we need to think about. And as Tyler mentioned, HLC is working on their regulations and they have not been submitted yet. Apparently a draft will be issued and there will be an opportunity for public comment. But again, we're coming up against our town meeting deadline as well. So hopefully some of these questions will be answered. But just to kind of go quickly, and again, this will be kind of a repeat of some of what Tyler said. The major provision changes here, it's up on the screen here. We allow attached ADUs by right currently and ADUs and detached structures by special permit of the ZBA. Under the new law, it allows both attached ADUs and detached structures by right, subject to reasonable regulations. So that's something that we're going to want to talk about, is what are those reasonable regulations? What do we feel needs to be included in our bylaw to reasonably regulate these? Does not allow the municipality to require a special permit or other discretionary permit for the use or rental of an ADU. Currently, we allow ADUs to be 1,000 gross square feet or 35% of the gross square footage of the primary dwelling, whichever is smaller. The new law has a maximum size of 900 gross square feet or 50% of the area of the primary dwelling, whichever is smaller. So the new one is actually less than what we allow right now. We require that either the primary dwelling or the ADU be occupied at least 6 months of the year by the property owner. We cannot require owner occupancy of either primary dwelling or ADU under the law. Our bylaw prohibits more than one ADU on a lot. There is a provision which would allow for more than one ADU on a lot by special permit if we wanted to do that. Our bylaw prohibits boarders and lodgers in both the primary dwelling and the ADU. And this is actually, I think, a slight language change that town council had recommended, which was may be subject to restrictions and prohibitions on short-term rental as defined in section 1 of chapter 64G. Currently, we allow no more than 2 bedrooms in an ADU, and the new law does not allow restrictions on the number of bedrooms in the ADU. So, however, they could configure 900 square feet. If they wanted 3 bedrooms, they could do that. A little cozy, but.
And as long as the septic was up to snuff.
And yes, yeah, yeah. Title V still pertains.
Yeah.
But as we were talking about before, it could either be an extension of the existing septic system or it could potentially be a new septic system on
For the
lot to
ADU.
serve the ADU, which is different. Which is really the next one. Right now, we require that all utilities serving the ADU be shared with the primary dwelling. That includes electric, septic, gas, etc. Under the new law, utilities serving the ADU may be extensions of the existing utilities serving the principal dwelling, but they don't have to be. Currently, we require a minimum of 1 parking space for an ADU. As Tyler said, now they've kind of got it as a maximum. We can't require more than 1 parking space for an ADU, and no parking space is required if the ADU is within half a mile of our commuter rail station. Our bylaw currently establishes a minimum lot size for ADUs in detached structures, and we cannot require to establish a minimum lot size. Our bylaw does allow for deviations from the dimensional requirements and other conditions by the ZBA as a special permit granting authority. As we said above, we could allow additional ADUs on a lot by special permit, but there may be other things that we want to consider. For example, right now, people could have an ADU that's 1,000 square feet. Do we want to still allow them to have an ADU that's 1,000 square feet, but that would be a special permit.
Might that be on a 5,000 square foot lot? I'm sorry, might that be on a 5,000 square foot lot on Plum Island?
Well, that would be, part of the thing to discuss is, would there be, what would be appropriate in certain areas.
You see, the zoning board's gonna need more members to help sort their way through all of that.
It seems like less work if it just take it, but I think, again, we're just trying to think through our special town and how this fits our residents equally across the town.
Now, our understanding for the PIOD right now is that the zoning that's in place, the limitation on bedrooms and the FA floor area ratio and things would still pertain. So they would have to be fit in with, within all of that, but we don't know that for sure because the regulations are still being drafted.
Right, and if I may, just to go off topic, that's, as I said the last time we met, part of my predilection is to say if I don't understand it, and I certainly don't understand it, if regulations are still being written, well, I'd vote no, knowing that I can always bring it back. But it's gonna be kind of tough to buy into this at town meeting if you don't know, well, to buy into some new rules at this point, not knowing what the framework that the state's gonna set up is.
Right. The issue is that the rules in our existing bylaw will no longer be enforceable after February 2nd, so we want to try to get something in place which does still set up some parameters for these.
And isn't, one other aside about that, I think if I was just standing, strictly on the outside as a going to town meeting, I really would be interested in saying, okay, here, the existing bylaw, or the old bylaw was something we thought was really good and made sense. Now we've got a new one. I'd want to see what have we lost, what have we gained. So I really would like to, I would recommend that at the end of the day, we see a red line strikeout and be able to present that to the public. But we can, that's a down the road comment, I think.
I think the challenge here with communication to Martha's point is encouraging folks to see the difference where this is not MBTA communities at all, because there is a state law that exists. Accessory dwelling units will be allowed February 3rd. So this is really your opportunity to put your quote reasonable restrictions on it. If you do nothing, the state law will supersede, as Martha said, your local bylaw, and there's nothing you can do. And so town meeting's about how do we craft it following the law to make sure it affects, there's no like MBTA communities, we voted no, and we're gonna fight it, there's nothing to do there, so that's the huge difference, yeah.
Larry, you had a question?
Actually, Ian just
Okay.
touched on it.
Well, the first ADU bylaw passed, and then we found that maybe there was a little tweaking and a couple little definitions, and so it took a year or two in play in order to figure it out and tweak it to where it is today. It wasn't just like we were one and done and got it right. There was some thought. I assume this might be the same if we're trying hard to figure out what's reasonable and then we see it in action.
And when was that passed?
So originally, I think it was passed in 2006, and then we did amendments in 2012, 2013, and 2015, all addressing issues that the ZBA had, and especially granting the special permits for the detached units. Just trying to clarify some of those provisions.
So site plan review would also not be permitted?
So there are a bunch of questions here for consideration. First of all, and Ian and Tyler, unless you know something different, I don't think that HLC has yet addressed ADUs in two-family dwellings or ADUs on non-conforming lots and structures.
Yeah, we're still waiting for clarification on that, yeah.
Right. So Larry, to your question, we could require site plan review for ADUs, so that's a question, does the town actually want to do that?
Well, it strikes me, if we need to put regulations in place and say we have a document, it passes at town meeting, chances are we're gonna find that those regulations need some tweaking. We don't wanna have to, may have no choice, but it's cumbersome to have to run back to town meeting every time you wanna tweak a regulation. And I'm wondering if perhaps site plan review might be a vehicle where the regulatory authority could be vested in the planning board or the ZBA, similar to what we have now with site plan review. Am I stating that clearly enough? In other words, is there a way to have a regulatory authority that doesn't have to run back to town meeting every time we want to change a comma or put in a semicolon?
Well, if it's all in the bylaw, it would have to go back to town meeting.
Well, that's
So
what I
guess
mean,
your
is there
question is,
some way around
could we
that?
establish some separate regulations that would pertain to this that was outside of the bylaw?
You might be able to do things like design guidelines, like what we saw with MBTA communities. I don't think we put this in Newbury's bylaw, but you could, in the bylaw, you could say the planning board may adopt and amend design guidelines, and then you specify in the bylaw like what those design guidelines can and can't be, and then the planning board has the authority. It's like very specific things that you then don't have to, it's part of your policies and procedures as the planning board that would be put in that you can change yourself. And it would be by right site plan review like MBTA communities is.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess the bigger question, so they're kind of two separate questions.
Yeah.
One is establishing regulations that don't have to go back to town meeting to be amended. But the other is site plan review itself. I mean, site plan review for us is a fairly extensive process. And do we want to require site plan review as we know it in Article 9 of our bylaw for an attached accessory dwelling unit? Or could there be some sort of administrative site plan review?
Is it really necessary to have a site review? Is it something that would be helpful in the long run, or is it just something pro forma?
And that's a question because our site plan review usually, if it's a level 2, and I don't know if this would fall into that, requires stormwater management review and all kinds of things. Eric's got.
Well, I'm with Larry in thinking that if we don't have anybody, and the building inspector is it yes or no? Then he's not really gonna collect the ifs or sort of, or the betterment or the understanding. So if there's something in place by the planning board for a site plan review or a ZBA checking the guidelines, then we're never gonna be able to perfect it, we're gonna pass it and it's gonna be, and how are we gonna address issues? Someone's gonna come back with a complaint and then there's gonna be, that's the only mechanism, is someone's gotta complain and protest about something that's already done in the past.
Right, but, I mean, currently attached is just building commissioner right now anyway, so there is nothing other than his checking the bylaw and making sure that it's compliant.
True, but it is.
So I'm playing devil's advocate by saying that.
Yeah, but building new, you're meeting the requirements. You're under the building code, which we kind of discussed or brought up before. By making it detached, you're adding something to a piece of property and structures that already exist, and so there's another sort of set of things to think about, and that's where the control usually needs to be vetted or reviewed.
That's what we've had so far.
So I just think and we might find that if the planning board is reviewing, you have planning review, and 5 years from now, you're like, we really don't need to be doing this. You can decide not to do it, but if we don't do it now, then how are we gonna figure out that we're doing this for the best of everybody?
Tyler, do you know, would it be possible to have site plan review only for one category, like for detached units?
That's a good question. My interpretation as of now would be you could. I would be curious to see if they define that in any of their regulations. As long as it's by right site plan review,
Right.
I don't see why it would be an issue to require it only for detached. I think it would come down to maybe how you define the detached ADU, and like if someone has a detached garage that they're converting, do you consider that a detached ADU? I don't know how it's defined right now, like if you're converting a structure versus building a completely new structure from scratch, do you see that differently? I think those are the tweaks you'd wanna think about too, because I don't know, if your neighbor and the garage looks the same, but now there's just a unit in there, does it really matter to go through a site plan review process? Something to consider as well.
One of the biggest things is neighbors show up and they're curious because of the location of either the existing or the new, and it's, okay, so are there more people on the property than we had today? There's people coming and going, there's lighting that's gonna be put out that's different. You know, some of the neighbors have raised concern, and we've politely said, we don't really have this in here, but are you willing to screen the lighting and put up, not only to block the light, but maybe if you're thinking of a patio in use, and usually it gets worked out very favorably. But where's that?
Yeah.
I guess that goes, to the building inspector again.
Yeah, so I would think you could consider doing differently for detached, but we'll add that to our list of FAQs as we're compiling a list just like you are, I think, Martha, of questions for the state too.
Could those things be in the design requirements, or is that, I'm a little confused.
Potentially.
But if you have, this is my ignorance, so if you have design requirements, does that mean then you have to have a site review to make sure they're complied with, or not necessarily?
Do we have any design requirements that the building inspector is looking at the building code, and he's looking at our zoning bylaws, right? So if there was a design guidelines within the bylaws that are under then the purview of the building inspector,
You'd have to make sure that they complied.
I feel like typically it's by site plan to answer your question if you have design guidelines, but I don't know if it's different in some communities.
the building inspector isn't supposed to be so subjective, right?
Right.
He's reading he's checking yes or no, is this complied, does this comply? And so we're not really giving him the discrimination to maybe make a leeway, which is why the planning board gets it, which is why the ZBA gets it with certain requirements, and the overlay district of Plum Island, as I had mentioned before, gives the ZBA great leeway to allow homeowners who have pre-existing non-conforming everything a way to do something, where other lots in town, which meet the requirement of a development, they meet the dimensional requirement. It's black and white.
Well, generally, site plan review is used for something bigger, right? Like it's bigger.
Yeah.
I think I guess that's the consideration in my mind is, certain things get worked out neighbor to neighbor now. Like if your neighbor puts a new fence up or they put a really bright light and you hate it, you have to work it out as a neighbor to neighbor kind of thing. Where's the line between that with a new dwelling unit and a neighbor? I don't know. How much does the planning board need to engage in those levels of conversation? Whereas our current site plan review, at least level 2, those are considerations. The lights on the neighbors, the buffer, all of that comes up because it's a bigger scale impact. Or is described as a bigger scale impact.
Yeah, to that point, it's about finding the line. I mean, if someone builds one single family home for themselves, you don't require site plan review, I don't imagine, for the one home.
Nope.
But you do if someone's building a 10 multifamily. I was in the MBTA district, if they want to build that, we require site plan review. So is the ADU, does that cross your line for requiring site plan, or is it treated like when someone just wants to build a single family home and they don't need to go to site plan?
No, I was just groping for a way to get the design criteria out of the necessity of going back to town meeting and doing it, that's all.
No, understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is just the start of the conversation, I would say, and as we work with the planning department and Martha and with town council, and we'll be back with further drafts and figure out what the next steps are, but
Thank you.
we're ready to rush to town meeting. It feels far away, but it's gonna be quick, so.
No, it
It'll be
is.
quick.
It'll be upon us before we know.
Great.
Yeah, so if you can all kind of look at the marginal comments and also if you've got the matrix, the questions that are at the bottom, and kind of think about those as we go forward. That would be helpful in shaping this. And we'll get this kind of composite version back to you guys, because it does shift a few of the things that you had recommended, so.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Tyler. Great presentation.
That's kind of housing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're gonna shift a little from purely housing, so if you're still interested in zoning, you can stay. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You all doing empty rooms.
Thank you, Eric.
All right. Thanks.
Floodplain bylaw review?
All right.
Discussion.
Okay, so similarly, thanks again.
I think you.
Excuse me. A scratchy throat.
Okay. Similarly, the town is required to update our floodplain bylaw. We have a floodplain bylaw, it's extensive, in our zoning bylaw, a section in our zoning bylaw, and essentially, this is a requirement that the National Flood Insurance Program, which is a federal program, requires that communities who are a part of the NFIP have a floodplain bylaw. So in the interest of time, I think I'll just kind of go through this quite quickly. There's a lot of detail. Essentially, the building inspector is the floodplain administrator. So this is not generally a part of planning board review processes. However, it is a part of our zoning bylaw. Some communities have the floodplain bylaw overlay district in their general bylaw, but it currently lives in our zoning bylaw.
Okay, then we.
So in general, the things, the reasons for the update are twofold. One is this is a federal requirement, and Massachusetts apparently has not quite updated our requirements as a state to meet the federal requirements. So there's a number of changes that are being proposed to all communities in the model bylaw that's been being sent out from DCR. And the other thing that's being updated is our maps. So the floodplain maps, the firm maps. So I don't think going through this line by line is a great use of all of our time. Would everyone feel comfortable if we don't do that?
So the highlighted language is the additions, right?
There's, correct, there's, well, yes, so there's edited, highlighted language, there's a lot of comments because there's still been considerations, about, in particular, I guess what I should say is, we're having the same discussion we just talked about with the ADU, which is, should we just replace in total what we currently have with the model bylaw? And I would say, chime in, Martha and Dan, we're leaning towards doing that because there are plenty of changes and modifications to our current bylaw. This, I don't know, why am I not on the right? Anyway, these aren't showing all of them.
Yeah, if you keep going down, then you get all the model bylaw stuff.
There's changes to the definitions, there's some requirements related to how communities review whether any projects are compliant with the requirements of building in the floodplain. So a whole bunch of different changes to the definitions. We have to update the reference to the flood maps. I think previously Newbury actually named the certain dates, but now, similar to what you were just saying, Larry, what we really should do is just reference using the most updated firm maps as referenced rather than naming the actual year and date. You have to designate who the floodplain administrator is. For Newbury, it's the building commissioner. Permits are required for all proposed development in the floodplain overlay district. So this is something I know that the professional entities for building commissioners have been talking a lot about this relative to, like, if you're changing your windows, does that trigger the need for a floodplain permit? No, probably not, but if you're building a new shed, it does. So just kind of going through the specificity of how the floodplain administrator is required to review and grant all the permits. What is the actual permit review process? At the moment, the town council has mentioned maybe there's just a review, like a box that you check when you're filing for your building permit that triggers that it must be evaluated by the floodplain bylaw. So, I mean, a lot of projects, similar to when something coming through the planning board for a permit also has to go through Conservation Commission. I think in many cases, projects that are being proposed in floodplains are already going through a process with the Conservation Commission. So a lot of it gets caught anyway, but that's my summary. Any questions, comments? So we'll be bringing this as a zoning amendment at town meeting, and it'll be a part of the public hearing process as well.
Okay.
There's another one that we're gonna have to do, which Kristen reminded me of yesterday. It goes back to the subdivision rules and regs that we modified in the site plan review regs, but making some changes to our site plan review bylaw for compliance with our MS4 stormwater permit. So
Didn't we do that?
we did the regulations, but we didn't do town meeting. We didn't do the bylaw. So the stormwater bylaw and our site plan review bylaw both need to be amended.
You're gonna love us at town meeting this year.
It's gonna be a big meeting,
meeting.
big zoning meeting,
And then,
yeah. So,
do you want me to kind of just give an update on where the recodification is?
Sure.
Unless there's
Yes.
anything else on the floodplain?
No.
All right, so no slides for this one, but just wanted to give you a brief update on the zoning recodification project, which we actually started back in 2022 and then got derailed by MBTA communities and the housing production plan and the hazard mitigation plan and all that good stuff. So back in 2022, we did start with a working group which consisted of Larry and Pete and Eric, who was just here, and me and town council. And we've started it up again with kind of a smaller group right now, basically staff plus town council. So it's been Kristen and Dan and I working with Lisa to kind of try to move this forward and get a draft together to bring it to you. So where we are right now, just as an overview, this is intended to be an article-by-article review of the current zoning bylaw to ensure consistency with Mass General Law, correct internal inconsistencies, clarify provisions throughout that are unclear, ambiguous, problematic, and so on, and update outdated provisions. So when we had our working group going before, we started with Article 1, which is the general provisions, and Article 11, which are the administrative provisions. Article 1 is the purpose and intent of the bylaw, and Lisa updated all of that to be consistent with Mass General Law. Ours was kind of lacking. And the administration section, she also did a big chunk of that. She added provisions regarding granting of building permits and enforcement variances, provisions regarding special permits. As you may recall, we tried to bring some of those before town meeting a couple of years ago and didn't pass at that time, but it's still important that we get some general provisions. And she's also taken a first pass at going through updating our definitions. And that's very much still in progress. I then took the whole thing and I've done sort of an annotated copy. So what our small group and working group is doing right now is kind of going through those annotations and addressing those things. And that includes some of the things that have been giving us trouble, like the open space residential development bylaw and the definition of open space and the yield plan and unit count and things like that, just to try to clarify some of those ambiguities and things that have proved to be problematic in some of our applications that have come before us. We've gotten up to about the middle of Article 5 right now, special permits, and so we still need to do the dimensional regulations, parking, signage, site plan review, which we'll be doing anyway, and 10, which is a general provisions, which include the ADU bylaw. In addition to open space, we know that we're going to have to probably deal with customary home occupation because we've had issues where a use required a special permit but was deemed through legal process to be considered a customary home occupation. Things that the ZBA has been dealing with or struggling with are building height regulation. Our table of use regulations hasn't been reviewed in quite a long time, so we need to go through that. And along with that, reviewing the special permit granting authority for various uses. Currently, Planning Board, ZBA, and the Select Board are all for different uses designated as a special permit granting authority. And there's been, some discussion that the SPGA should be limited to the Zoning Board and the Planning Board. So that's something that will be included. So the next steps will be we'll complete our working group review and have a draft which will then come to the planning board for review and also to the zoning board for review. And we'll hold meetings with each board and then start the town meeting process. A major decision that needs to be made is how much of this do we actually try to address for town meeting, because it's a lot. So, you know, so maybe this time we focus on changes to Article 1 and Article 11 and maybe a couple of the real hot items that are giving us trouble, and deal with the rest of it later. I don't know, but that's something we'll have to decide fairly quickly, because we do have to start that.
Well, I mean, is
Process.
it realistic to think you can have this together for this Springtown meeting?
Probably not the entire thing, I
So,
would guess.
That answers
So,
the question then.
but then the question is, which parts of it do we want to bring forward? So, and not looking for any answers now, it's just, that's kind of the question.
Yeah, something to think about.
And how
We'd
would-
take any answers if you have them.
That's true.
I got loads of answers.
I'm
I don't
looking
know if
for
they-
answers.
I don't know if they match your questions, so. How
I
would-
mean, I think it's part of, honestly, I'm joking, but I'm not joking, because I think we as a board and a program do need to figure out what is ready to present for town meeting. Like, we all are in the weeds, spending hours thinking and working, and you've all, the boards have been working for years on the issues, but what are the priorities? There's administrative, there's things that have specifically been problematic, discrete changes, and then there's sort of these bigger, there's bigger buckets, if you will, like, well, maybe it's time to really rethink our open space residential subdivision in some broader way. We're not gonna be ready for that, I'll put it on the table. But, before, pretty much this month, we need to know what we feel ready to bring and to, talk with our neighbors about and have public meetings about and explain in a way that makes sense to people so we can make good changes. It's not an easy process, so we do need to figure that out.
Right, so to that end, if there are things that are real hot button items for you all that, we've been struggling with for years, that would be a good time to kind of get those on the.
We got Mary back. Just in time. She can answer it.
I just imagine if you prepared a big list, we could all multi-vote the next time we get together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or sticky dots.
Right.
Well, we probably would need some, discussion.
Choices, yeah.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
We could have a, workshop, some afternoon over the next couple of weeks. I hear you.
Yeah,
I think, answers would be welcomed.
yeah. It's tough having only one town meeting, because it's sort of like, if we don't get something ready now, then it'll be a while.
It's a year,
And it's been a while, so,
No, we certainly need to, prioritize, the things that we wanna
Yeah.
move forward. But, we also want some wins, right? So, sure there'll be some, maybe a little low-hanging fruit, right? And then there's the big eggs, that, you may wanna tackle one or something,
right,
but, I would, think that would be the right next step would be to get together, maybe in some afternoon.
yeah,
And we've had some crazy OSRDs, so yield plans, so. Maybe that's, I don't know if that's realistic to tackle that one, but that would be, I don't know the answers either, so.
Right, I mean, the town council's recommended some ways of looking at that. So we can, put that language out to you. I mean, it seems like the yield plan and the definition of open space and
Yeah.
how it's looked at have really been the two major issues.
Well, that and condominiums too.
And yes, which, yeah.
Yeah.
Because right now, we actually don't have any we talk about an OSRD subdivision, but as we know, 105 High Road was an OSRD site plan, and we don't really address that in the bylaw clearly, so.
And didn't a question come up about a OSRD A&R plan?
Yeah,
That was a weird
yeah, that was,
thing
that was,
that we didn't really quite know, like
right.
how to count. It's like counting the yield and counting the units, questions, but. I mean, that's helpful, discussion, I think, because it is, it's a lot, and we've got ADUs, and we've got floodplain, and we've got stormwater tweaks, and that's a lot already, but like, I could imagine there being, if there was one zoning amendment warrant article that described administrative cleaning up, right? Like instead of selectmen, we're changing it to say select board, and we're repaginating and, whatever, all that clerical administrative cleanup that's needed. Well, that's
Bylaw's
pretty.
still the same all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing that hopefully we could pass. And then if there's like one other sort of bigger thing, if maybe it's these topics we're thinking about, if that feels like a sort of something that's been known for quite a while now that it's a problem, so maybe that's the one that's worth tackling first. Any comments on the screen?
I was disconnected for about 15 minutes or so. Welcome to the world of this area without any new tower.
Oh.
Geez, I wish we could get a new tower.
Oh.
Gotta start working on that, guys. Not in my backyard.
I think if you just if you just pick one or two of the biggest concerns, and that's it, because there is already so much right now with town meeting.
Yeah.
It's gonna overwhelm people.
Yeah.
And I think having your charts where it just plug this, plug that, this is why, without the red lines, because red lines are it drives me nuts.
Me too.
Red line. Just give me the concise, what do I need to know, why do I need to know, and why does it make sense or not make sense?
Yeah.
I agree, Pete.
So, that's it, that's all I'm saying.
No, that makes sense.
So just to follow up on Scott's comment of, would people be interested in a separate meeting at some point before December 23rd? Because I think our next regular meeting does have some permitting stuff on it already. So it's, if we want to have a separate meeting, we should make a plan for that and find a time if possible. I know this is a busy time. If we want to bundle it onto the next regular meeting, we could potentially do that, but it could be a longer meeting. It's not a huge agenda yet, though.
Did they put in materials today?
No, we don't have any materials yet, but they'll be submitted next week, so there are a couple of projects on it. I don't know, we can talk about that, but I don't know if people are traveling or super busy between now and the next few weeks. There's not a lot of time.
We're all here now. What's everyone's thoughts?
Yeah.
I'm available.
I'm available as well.
Same.
So really, it's
We could have our annual Christmas party at Martha's after.
there. You go. That's a great suggestion, right, Martha?
Potluck zoning.
We can go to your house.
More than welcome.
Alright. Well, really, it's,
Okay,
comes down to you, Dan and Kristen's schedule, right?
yeah, if it, I mean, maybe, and it's Martha in particular who's driving our codification expertise, I think. So we're meeting with town council on Monday to dive into where we left off. So maybe it's worth having that meeting and then following up after that. And if that would leave, where are we with the weeks? We leave 2 weeks or just 1 week?
So your next meeting's on the 18th, your next regular meeting?
Yes, I believe so.
So we anticipate the public hearing on zoning amendments when?
February. First notice would be in February.
I think
February,
so
early
the language submitted to the select board by January 22nd meeting. And then the hearings in February and onward.
So we may or may not have time in January, but it also has to be ready for the 22nd.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That would have to go before council, not council.
yeah, I mean, it certainly needs to be finalized by the time the public hearing notice is
Christmas is 1, 2, 3 Wednesdays from now. So really, you're saying Monday the 9th is your next town council meeting.
that's the goal, yes.
Our next meeting's on the 18th, so, I mean, it would have to be sometime next week. Or not at all, I guess.
Or it could be the beginning of the following week, depending on everybody's schedule.
Yeah, before our next meeting.
Okay, so we'll keep our ears out for a few days about how busy the December 18th agenda is, for one, and then for two, we will get a better sense after our meeting on Monday where we are with things on the 9th, and then we can throw out some possibilities for the end of next week or the beginning of the following week.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Martha, how does that sound?
Yep, no, that sounds fine.
Okay. We also, I should say, is this a segue, but the first Wednesday of January, which is a normal meeting date, is January 1st. So I just want to check, but I'm assuming we won't be meeting on January 1st. It's a holiday, so the building is closed. So if we just, people looking ahead at their dates, we could meet on January 8th and the 22nd. There are actually 5 Wednesdays in January.
Yep.
So if we just pushed it off a week, it would be meeting on January 8th, which is the Wednesday, and then 2 weeks later, the 22nd would be the Wednesday after Martin Luther King Day. And then we'd be back, we'd still have another week before the first Wednesday of February. Mention that.
And you said the deadline in February is the 22nd?
The deadline for zoning stuff?
Yeah.
January
22nd, yes.
January 22nd.
Right, so I think that would be the vote for the select board to, and for the planning board to vote to refer the articles to the select board, get it on their agenda for January 28th, and then they have to refer it back to the planning board for public hearing.
You know, for the referral to the select board, there's still some wiggle room there, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be in absolute final form.
No, but it should be by the time of the public
Reasonably,
hearing,
yeah.
reasonable, yeah, by the time the public hearing notice is posted, it should be, cause that's kind of what we ran into last year with the MBTA communities.
Okay, so there's some things to think about.
Got a plan.
Yep, and we have a
Thank you.
plan. All right, next thing on the agenda, 8:25. November 24th financial report, and I don't have it. Do you have
know,
it to read? No, we'll do it next month, next meeting.
I
excuse me.
didn't print it out, so.
That's fine. All right, liaison reports, we have ZBA, Larry?
I have nothing, they're meeting on the 19th, and it's nothing new since my last report.
All right, and conservation, and conservation met last night, it was shorter meeting. And the only thing that pertained to us was 170 Orchard, they recommended the select board that they pass by. So that moves on to MVPC. Steve.
I do not have anything, they haven't, neither the commissioners nor the planners have met since we last reported to you on it.
Okay. Now on to planning staff report.
I'd like to welcome Dan to report on anything he's interested in
Sure.
telling the board about.
So, good evening, planning board. Happy to report the Caldwell Farm Trail has been flagged, has been cut. It is basically ready to be traversed. However, there's parking that has gone in, hasn't been confirmed if it's officially there. Mason Conservation Agent was down there today. And then we have some work to do on signage, and the open space rec committee will be handling that, so.
I saw the parking paved or whatever
Oh, it is
as
it?
I drove by tonight.
Okay.
That's right where
Yeah.
the trucks had been yesterday when I came or whatever, so,
Fantastic.
which is exactly where I thought it was gonna be.
How
Good.
long is that trail? How long is that trail, Daniel? Yeah.
I don't know full distance, but it's a nice big loop out to the Governor Academy's property and then comes back
Oh, so
around.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a decent one.
It's probably a mile.
Yeah, I
Don't
mean,
you think?
it's a good little walk.
Yeah, it's
Pretty good. And there, yeah, a couple things, like there's a knoll there, so there's a loop around the knoll if you wanna do just a short one, or else it goes all the way around the property and comes out on the side of Caldwell Farm where the septic system is.
That's
So
been,
currently there isn't a full loop because the decision was made that it was quite near the wetlands to loop around and that maybe it would be okay to not have the small knoll loop at the moment.
Okay.
But
I
it
misspoke
is,
then.
yeah, no,
That was the
it would certainly be a lovely small loop, but currently it's just one bigger loop. So it does, as Dan said, it comes quite close to some of the trails, both on Adeline Road and Governor's, so there's the opportunity for the town to reach out to the neighbors and see if they can somehow make connections, but it's very pretty in the back there, so. Good time of year to walk, cause the ticks are kinda going away.
They're not gone.
They are not gone. My
Sometimes
dog
they're out
still
all
comes in
winter,
with
depending on
ticks.
the weather.
Wow.
They're never gone.
Yeah, scary. So anyway, great, thank you. Do you wanna?
That
anything
concludes
else?
my report.
thank you, Dan.
Just a couple quick updates. The hazard mitigation plan has been officially approved by FEMA, so it will be on the select board's agenda next week on the 10th for adoption locally. So that's a huge, exciting project to celebrate the completion of. Really, you know, Martha in particular has been working on that for a while, but we did a lot of work over the whole last year with all the other departments and the hazard mitigation working group, meeting with regional neighboring towns as well. So huge congratulations on that. And then, yeah, I think the 170 Orchard notice needs to be revised. So that is, it still hasn't come to the select board yet. So that's probably why the Conservation Commission didn't move forward on that yet. And just continue to be a lot of discussions, Border to Boston Trail. I had a meeting with the Safe Routes to School program, which is a really awesome source of funding that the town should try to look at getting some money for. They have some grant rounds coming up. We have a meeting with the Active Transportation group next week, and then another meeting with the federal TIP, sort of an annual meeting to review what projects are on the transportation federal program for construction funding with Merrimack Valley Planning Commission next week. And the Open Space Committee is moving forward on their open space rec plan. So there's a lot of good other planning work going on. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's it, Kristen?
That's it.
Okay, great.
Yep.
No questions? We'll move on. Planning board meeting minutes, November 25th, 2024.
Did you get them?
No.
Yes?
didn't get 'em.
No?
Yeah, came through in a second message. from
Okay.
Dan.
Did everyone have a chance to review them?
I have,
Okay. Pete, Mary, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes,
So I entertain a motion to accept the planning board meeting minutes?
I'll move to accept the minutes.
Second? Okay,
Needs to be a roll call vote because they're participating remotely.
yep. Okay, roll call vote. Pete?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Mary?
yes.
And how do you feel?
Well written.
Okay, well written. And I will abstain, I did not see them. So, there you go.
And just quickly, thanks to Larry and Daniel, who are continuing to work on some of the older minutes, like very awesome.
Actually, starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel here.
And we still have a few
That's
left.
amazing,
Yeah, I've got a few more to go, but,
yeah.
They're in there.
That's fantastic. Today Daniel was reviewing one, he said, "Why are you on this meeting for 2019?" And I said, "Oh, that's probably when I was on the planning board." So that took me back. But
So,
anyway,
there's still a few out there.
yeah,
Good work.
we're close.
well, I think most of the ones we have left are already in draft, so,
Yes.
Yeah.
which is a big help, huge help.
That's the big part of it.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Well, welcome back, Martha.
It was very nice to see you, Martha.
Good to see you all.
Yes.
If no one has anything else, I'd entertain a motion.
You have a motion.
Second.
All right,
Yeah, second.
and roll call vote. Pete,
Yes, sir.
Larry,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes, and nice to see you guys.
how do you feel?
Most assuredly, yes.
Okay, and I say yes as well. Great meeting, everyone. Thank you and have a good night.